So the question is, should you do one longer run or should you double it between two shorter runs? So let's go ahead and talk about that right now. How's it going, runners? My name is Justin Thompson. I'm your average running PT, and I help the average runner achieve their own personal elite status. If that's something you guys are into, then go ahead and click that subscribe button and hit the bell so you guys know when the next video comes out. So before we get into whether you should do one or the other, let's talk a little bit about just how are we actually dosing our running. So if we think about dosage of running, we have to think about three different things. We have to think about the frequency of our runs, we have to think about the duration of our runs, and we have to think about the intensity of our runs. And those three things are going to make up your overall dosage of your exercise prescription. Now, obviously, when we talk about frequency, we're talking about how many times are you running over a given period. So say you run every day for a week and you do one time a day. That means your frequency is one time a day over the course of a week. However, if you are doing 2 runs a day, that is your frequency. 2 runs a day over the course of a week. You get 14 runs over the course of a week. That's a different frequency, right? So you're running more often than if you were just running once a day. So that's frequency, and that's really what we're talking about today when we are talking about whether you should do 2 runs versus 1 longer run. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about frequency. Now, you can't really ignore the fact, though, that when we're talking about 2 shorter runs versus 1 longer run, you're also considering duration. So let's say you're wanting to run 10 total miles. Well, you may want to run all 10 of those miles at one time in one run. That duration is going to take you significantly longer than if you do 2 runs of 5 miles. At least the duration of each run individually. And of course, intensity has to be taken into account as well. Obviously, you're not going to be able to run at as high of an intensity over a longer run as you are over shorter runs. Now, all 3 of these factors really need to be taken into account when you are considering your overall exercise dosage or your overall running dosage. But let's bring it back now to 1 longer run versus multiple shorter runs. And what I want to focus on today is primarily the frequency and duration. Because whenever you're doing these types of longer runs, generally they're at a recovery type of an effort. And so you can pretty much normalize or keep those efforts pretty similar whether you're doing it longer or shorter. So let's say you're running at 10-minute per mile pace, you can probably do that over a 10-mile run, and also you can just keep yourself at a nice easy pace for 2 5-mile runs. So I'm not going to talk as much about the intensity today as I am about the frequency and duration. Now, what I also want to do is I want to break this into a couple of different systems in our body. So we have different systems in our body that are going to react differently to exercise. So obviously running is a cardiovascular activity, so we're going to have to consider the heart and the lungs and all of that whenever we're talking about these longer versus shorter runs. Now, I also want to consider the musculoskeletal system, so your muscles, your tendons, your bones, your joints, your ligaments, all of that kind of stuff, because obviously we're using those things when we are running. So let's talk about the cardiovascular system for a second. Now, the cardiovascular system, if you think about just the heart muscle itself, it's made of cardiac muscle, okay? Cardiac muscle is different than skeletal muscle in the sense that it's very, very vascularized, meaning there's a lot of blood flow to the heart muscle, okay? A lot of blood flow to the heart muscle, and it's very, very dense with mitochondria. If you remember, we've talked about this in the past about the mitochondria are kind of the powerhouse of the cell, and they create the energy within the cell. Now, because the cardiac muscle is so highly vascularized and has so much mitochondria, it's designed to go a very, very long time. really is designed to go about 80 to 100 years because it's constantly working throughout our entire life. It beats about once a second every single day, every single minute, all the time. So obviously this muscle here was designed for endurance. Now because of that, you're probably going to have to go a little bit longer in order to stress the heart muscle before you start to stress the skeletal muscles. So if your primary goal is improving cardiovascular efficiency, then going for a longer duration, in my opinion, now this is not 100% backed by science, so take that as it is, but in my opinion, if you are going for a longer duration, you're going to eventually start to stress the heart a little bit more, right? Now obviously you can stress the heart by going at higher intensities, but again, we're not really talking about intensity too much. We're just talking about duration. Now if you go for a longer duration, then eventually the heart muscle is going to start to get stressed a little bit more, and now you're giving it a stimulus for change. Okay, so if you are trying to improve the efficiency of the heart or the cardiovascular system, I think doing a longer run is going to be more beneficial for that cardiovascular system. Now keeping in mind that this has to be within reason, because if we just go too long, then our heart can't really keep up and we end up having this cardiac drift, which I still need to do a video on. That we end up getting this cardiac drift, and then you're not really training the muscle in the same way anymore. Now you're training it a little bit more anaerobically. Now let's go to the musculoskeletal system for a second, and skeletal muscle, your tendons, your bones, your joints, all of that kind of stuff. Now we can't talk too much about these longer runs versus shorter runs without talking about hydration, and I want to make sure that I drop this in here real quick, because whenever we are running longer, obviously we have a higher risk of getting dehydrated. If you are dehydrated, then it's not providing enough nutrients and enough fluid to the muscles, the joints, the tendons, the bones, in order to help them stay supple, stay, what's the word I'm looking for? Resilient. Instead, they start to get dehydrated, they start to get a little bit more brittle, and then you become a little bit more likely to have some sort of an overuse injury. Kind of like when leather gets dehydrated and becomes easily cracked or broken. Okay, so if you are considering running longer, you have to think about what's going on hydration-wise so that you are providing enough nutrients to the muscles, joints, bones, and tendons. Now here's the benefit of doing two separate runs. You have time in between to go ahead and rehydrate. Obviously if you're on a longer run and you're carrying a pack with you and you've got water and all that kind of stuff, then great, that's fantastic. Then you can keep hydrated. But let's say you don't have a hydration pack or anything like that, or any way to hydrate yourself on the course of the run, then it might be more beneficial to you to split those runs up, because over the course of your day or over the course of a week, whether you run 10 miles all at once or 5 miles 2 separate times, the musculoskeletal stimulus is going to be pretty much the same. Now I always think about it in these terms. As a physical therapist, I tend to give people home exercise programs for them to do between coming in and seeing me, right? And a lot of times what I'll give people is 20 repetitions of a specific exercise, but they need to do it 5 times a day, okay? Versus if I gave them 100 reps to do at one time, it's the same number of repetitions. However, the musculoskeletal system may not be able to handle all those repetitions at one time, but it will be able to handle breaking it up over the course of the day. Same thing with your running. If you take 10 miles and do it all at one time, your muscles, your joints, your tendons may not like that too much, but it may be okay with doing a 5-mile run in the morning and then another 5-mile run 8 hours later after you've had the chance to rehydrate and refuel. So let me just kind of wrap it up and kind of conclude here. What do I think is the best? And, the answer, it pretty much depends on who you are, what you're doing. But in general, if you want to train the cardiovascular system, then I would do a longer duration run. If you're concerned, however, with musculoskeletal injuries, say you're prone to tendonitis or you have some running gait problem that would put you at risk of a tendon injury or a muscle tear or something like that, then I would break it up into 2 different runs. Now I know that some of you may think this is 100% complete nonsense, so I would love to hear your comments down below, and I would love to have that discussion. And I'm usually pretty responsive to those comments, so make sure that you leave those comments down below, because I would love to have that conversation with you. And tell me, I have no problem with being wrong. This is the best knowledge that I have, both research-wise and anecdotally, from what I hear from my patients and in my own running itself. So that's it for today, guys. Go on out there, seek your elite. God bless, and I'll see you guys next time.